a smooth upgrade. So I got quite a few slides here, so I'm just going to dive right into it. I already got a quick introduction, but just to reiterate, I have about 10 years of Sitecore experience. I'm the Director of Solution Architecture here at eDynamic. And one of my passions with Sitecore is actually using the platform for personalization and a lot of the experience marketing that Sitecore provides. We're not going to talk about any of that today. We're going to focus solely on the upgrade. But if you want to know more about Sitecore's marketing capabilities, please reach out to us. So, what is eDynamic? We're an award-winning global digital marketing and technology agency. And what that means is we really blend kind of the marketing piece and the technology piece, which is a great fit for Sitecore because of Sitecore's vast marketing capabilities. We have exceptional Sitecore expertise. We're a gold implementation partner. We've delivered 200 Sitecore sites since 2003, and we have over 80 certified Sitecore developers. One of our specialties as well is developing Sitecore integrations. So you see a bunch of marketing automation tools among other platforms listed here. We have connectors for those to kind of pull, both pull and push data to and from Sitecore. So finally, getting into the meat of this presentation. So here are our goals today. We're going to identify reasons to keep Sitecore in a current version. We're going to identify the key parts or components of the upgrade process. We're going to identify areas for research and planning. We're going to review a recommended approach. And hopefully by the end, everyone is going to be more comfortable with the upgrade process. We're going to try to demystify, what a upgrade process actually looks like and try to get everyone more comfortable. So getting into why you should upgrade. If you're on this webinar, you may already be convinced, right, that you need to upgrade. But for those of you that may need to build a business case for upgrading Sitecore, I'm going to go through just a few things quickly as to why you should look to keep Sitecore on a current version. First being support from Sitecore, browser compatibility, the server and database support for the different versions of Sitecore, and then of course the new features. So a lot of this comes from Sitecore's knowledge base. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but feel free to kind of research this out on your own. So let's talk a little bit about Sitecore support. If you're on a version of Sitecore today that's 6.x, your mainstream Sitecore support is already ended at the end of last year. If you're on 7.0 or 7.1, your support ends here in the next month or so, the mainstream support. And then looking forward, 7.2 and 7.5, the mainstream support ends at the end of next year. So in other words, if you're not already on Sitecore, 8.x, your Sitecore support is kind of on, it's kind of going to be limited. And what I mean by that is what's mainstream support. So mainstream support basically checks all these boxes, right? Once you're in the extended support phase, which every version of Sitecore other than 8.x will be at by the end of next year, assistance with errors or unexpected behavior during development or content authoring or what have you, also product defects or bugs that you might find along the way, all of those are going to in the extended support phase are going to cost additional money. You really want to keep your version of Sitecore so that it's in the mainstream support. Browser support is another kind of big deal, and if you're on an old version of Sitecore today, you probably experience this pretty regularly, where Chrome gets an update or Firefox gets an update, and you might see some quirks. Generally speaking, Sitecore is built with standards in mind, so most everything works, even as new versions of browsers come out. But there are some limitations. One of those being here, the Microsoft Edge browser, which is brand new in Windows 10, is only going to support the latest version of 7.2 and then 8.x. So as more organizations are upgrading to Windows 10, usually, Internet Explorer, the Microsoft browser, ends up being the default browser for most users. Microsoft Edge, that latest browser, is only going to be supported really in the latest versions of Sitecore. Talking about, server and workstation OSs, this is another reason you might want to upgrade, particularly around workstation OSs, where really only Windows 8 and above support, above Sitecore version 7. When you talk about Windows 10, Windows 10 has support for 7.2 and then 8.x. So once again, looking at as you're upgrading your software, your Windows versions and Windows Server versions, you'll want to be on the latest version of Sitecore to kind of get those support for those latest versions. Database is another big one. I'll point out just a couple things here. If you're on Microsoft Azure, the Microsoft Azure SQL option that's only available right now in 8.2 is a really, really compelling option. And what that means is that you can use SQL as software as a service rather than having to support actual physical database servers in the Azure environment. Support for SQL 2016 is coming. I would suspect that it's going to be here in the next update of 8.2. But really, most IT organizations today will want to be on 2014 and 2016, and maybe 2012. And you see the support there for 2014 is really limited to 7.5 and above. So once again, just the latest versions of Sitecore are needed to support the latest versions of software. I also wanted to point out Mongo. So if you're already on Mongo, on XDB, likely on Sitecore 7.5, just know that MongoDB 2.6, which shipped with 7.5 and 8.0, that version of Mongo has actually been end of life, actually a few months ago. So it's really important to get onto Mongo 3.x, and you'll need to upgrade Sitecore in order to do so. And finally, the new features that come with a Sitecore upgrade. I have a bunch listed here. A lot of these assume that you're coming from Sitecore 6.x, but obviously, XDB is a game changer. XDB, XProfile, the whole analytics improvements are a big deal, and those come starting in 7.5. Sitecore Content Search and those API changes were also a significant upgrade going from 6.6 to 7.0. Speak UI, Sitecore Items Web API. And along with, with Sitecore 8, it's a much more user-friendly experience, and it also has a vastly improved experience editor. So definitely the new features are another big reason that you'll want to upgrade your Sitecore. So finally, kind of getting into the basics of what a Sitecore upgrade is. So what are the components of a Sitecore upgrade? What are kind of the things that you need to worry about when you're looking to do a Sitecore upgrade? First thing is the database. Second, configuration, the new Sitecore files, so things like the DLLs, new files in the Sitecore directory, etc. You might have to do some code updates, and finally, you might find yourself having some new server roles that you need to worry about, specifically around XDB. So let's kind of dive into each one of these areas just to kind of get a better understanding of what all these mean. So when we're talking about the database, what we're actually talking about is the content tree. And the way that gets updated is through the Sitecore upgrade packages. They have a .update extension, and you get them from either SDN for versions prior to Sitecore 8 or dev.sitecore.net for versions 8 and above. These wizards, what they do is they're going to upgrade your database, upgrade your content tree. Usually they're going to write some files to disk as well. But each one of these upgrade packages will have a series of steps. This is an example right here on the screen. So this is actually going from one version of 7.2 to 7.2 Service Pack 2. And the reason I grabbed this one is you see that step number 2 there's actually a manual step where you actually have to run a SQL script, against the databases. But this is what a typical upgrade instructions might look like. there's some instructions around Solar if you're using Solar. It's going to tell you to run the update package. And I'd like to point out here also step 8, where it says update your configuration files, and that's a whole nother set of instructions that you kind of will need to do in order to get your Sitecore upgraded. We're going to talk about how not to do this a little bit later, but kind of following those instructions, this is something that you would have to do, and you can see here that this could be a very time-consuming process. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about code changes. Usually, code changes are only going to be required for major version upgrades. Like typically, going from say an 8.0 to an 8.2 isn't going to require code changes, or if there are changes, they're going to be pretty minor. But going from 6.6 to 8.x, for example, or even 7.0, there's a whole new API for content search. So if you're using Lucene or Solar to do queries in Sitecore, there's a whole new API that was introduced there. Starting in Sitecore 7.5 with the introduction of XDB, if you're directly using the analytics API in any way, many of those APIs changed, when XDB was introduced. Also, we've got the introduction of Speak starting in 7.2, which is a new way to kind of customize the UI, the UI in the authoring environment. So what do you do with the code changes? You're going to start with the new Sitecore DLLs. Sitecore recently introduced NuGet support, where you can actually grab the DLLs straight from NuGet. You can also just add them to your solution in a lib folder or whatever you're doing today, but that's kind of the first step, is getting your DLLs into source control, and then trying to compile your solution and looking for errors. Last point here, if you're making several leaps, you'll want to make sure to wait until the final version to do these code changes. There's really no sense in going from 6.6 to 7.0 doing code changes, and then going to 7.1 and 7.2, and then finally up to 8.x. Really, you can make your code changes all at the same time once you've arrived at the version that you're targeting. And finally, some new server roles. So this is specifically around XDB. XDB requires MongoDB and also a processing server. That's a whole nother webinar, to be perfectly honest with you, so I'm not going to really dive deep into this, but you do have some options. When you do the Sitecore upgrade, you can put it in X management mode, not utilizing all the features and capabilities of XDB. Maybe that's a separate phase. You can turn that on later. Or you can actually use some cloud options for XDB or Mongo. The easiest being XDB Cloud from Sitecore, where essentially you just change your configuration settings and you have XDB. All right, so let's talk a little bit about planning. And to me, this is the key to success for any Sitecore upgrade, is effectively planning all the different components that we just talked about, and also kind of doing an inventory of your Sitecore installation. So speaking of Sitecore installations, I mean, that's one thing that you're going to have to worry about. So the Sitecore upgrade obviously isn't going to just touch production, right? Like all your other environments are going to have to be upgraded as well. Developer workstations, maybe you have a development server, QA, UAT staging, and also in production, it's not you have the CMS, the content authoring side, and you have content delivery. So you need a strategy as to how you're going to get all of these updated. If you're using Sitecore best practices and you're using a tool like TDS or Unicorn to kind of store your developer type changes in source control, then typically this is pretty easy. Because what you do is you upgrade your production, you do a backup and restore to your other environments, and then you redeploy your in-flight changes, using TDS or Unicorn. If you're not using, if you're not storing your Sitecore developer Sitecore changes in source control, you may have some issues here, where you may need to actually upgrade each of these environments separately. But that's definitely something you're going to want to figure out before you start this process. You're also going to want to inventory your Sitecore add-ons. So that's things like Sitecore modules. A big one would be web forms to marketers. So if you're using web forms to marketers, there are significant changes to that module from 7.x to 8.x. Big changes, and you're going to have to run the upgrade for that module as you're stepping through the upgrade of Sitecore. You can't just wait until the end. Other marketplace modules, are they compatible with the version you're upgrading to? Oftentimes, they may not officially list Sitecore 8 as compatible, and you might find that they are. So there might actually be some testing involved here to see, whatever modules you're using, are they compatible? Do they still work in 8.x? And you'll also find that sometimes some modules that you might have installed in an older version of Sitecore are no longer necessary because that functionality is now built into Sitecore. You also need to worry about other third-party components, Clay Tablet being one of those. So if you're using Clay Tablet for translation, for example, you'll need to make sure that you get an upgrade from them to your target version of Sitecore. .NET Framework is another component that you'll want to kind of inventory. A lot of older Sitecore installations might be just running on .NET 4.0, and there are some changes when you upgrade to 4.5. One of those being Microsoft Identity. So that's definitely something that's super easy for your developers to test. Just change the target compilation framework to 4.5.2 and see if anything breaks. So if you're in a multi-site Sitecore installation, what's your approach going to be? Is it going to be a big bang upgrade? Can all of the sites be upgraded at once? Or are you going to upgrade them maybe one at a time or something like that? And an important consideration there is that, if you are going to if you're not going to upgrade them all at once, you're going to be supporting multiple content delivery instances, say a 7.0 and an 8.2. You may need to have engage Sitecore for some temporary licensing to support that extra instance. To be perfectly honest, if all of your sites can be upgraded at once, that's the approach that you'll want to take. It's definitely the simplest approach. Performance, you'll want to take some baseline metrics, response time, CPU memory. Also note that the hardware requirements for Sitecore 8.x are different. Sitecore 8 is a big upgrade. There's a lot of new features, and Sitecore is doing a lot of cool things, but with that, the hardware requirements are bumped a little bit. Sitecore 8 does perform better. I've done these metrics many times. Sitecore 8 always performs better than the previous versions. The reason you want to take these metrics is if you're seeing some sort of degradation on one of your pages or what have you, you'll want to investigate that and see exactly what's going on. Maybe it's a pipeline that's not properly coded for the new version of Sitecore, or maybe it's a .NET Framework change or something like that you'll need to investigate. So these performance metrics help you have comfort that the upgrade went well, and also you can use them to identify maybe some problem spots. Configuration is a big deal. I mean, I showed you that screenshot earlier of all the steps that Sitecore has you take, the configuration changes during the upgrade. I'm going to recommend actually a different approach, and that's the second point here, which is patching in your Sitecore configuration changes. And if you're not familiar with that, just do a quick Google search. But basically, it lets you have a separate configuration file that your developers use that's stored in source control that will change the Sitecore configuration without modifying the actual Sitecore, the default out-of-the-box configuration files. You want to ensure that your patching places, if you're already doing patching during the upgrade process, you want to ensure that your patching is actually putting the configuration where it needs to be in the new version of Sitecore. So, if it's a pipeline, for example, make sure that it's in the right order and things like that. And the admin show config page can really help with that process. You're also, going back to that first point, you're also going to want to document your non-Sitecore web config changes. So there's nothing really you can do about this. It's really just kind of a merge process. But if you have some documentation on that, it certainly helps the process. So what would those things be? That would be like custom setting sections within your web config. If you have WCF endpoints or other endpoints, configured, oftentimes the URLs and things like that are going to be stored in the config. If you have app settings for your .NET code, that'll be there. All that's just going to need to be kind of merged in with the default Sitecore web config. And finally, go live. So what does that look like? So what is the final database upgrade timing? What does that look like? Is there going to be a content freeze, and how long? Your new code and configuration deployment. You're going to want to have that figured out and probably set up ahead of time. And of course, for any major software upgrade, you're gonna want to have to worry about rollback, right? You're going to want to, if something does go wrong with the go live process, you're going to want to be able to go back to your previous version of Sitecore, and then you can figure out kind of what went wrong. All right, so let's talk about an upgrade approach. This is an approach that I've had a lot of success with in the past. There are others, but I'm hoping that you can at least take some points from my approach and use them in your own environment. So let's talk about a local upgrade. So this is for a developer workstation, maybe a sandbox environment or something like that. And what you're going to do there is your developers are going to practice the upgrade steps. They're actually going to go through the upgrade and get your Sitecore database upgraded to your target version. The developers are going to work with Sitecore support on any errors that are encountered. Sometimes you install an upgrade package and you'll see an error in the logs. You don't want to ignore those. You want to make sure that you engage with Sitecore support to get any errors taken care of. You get those fixed. I say this several times in this presentation, but this is definitely a point of advice that you should consider is using vanilla content management instances. So instead of, if you have a content management that's heavily customized today with pipelines or maybe different buttons or different things, different modules you have installed, using a vanilla content management instance, straight from Sitecore, will ensure success. It'll ensure that your custom pipelines that you have written aren't going to interfere with the upgrade process, and it's also going to make the upgrade process slightly faster. I mentioned this earlier, but you're going to want to upgrade the modules along with the Sitecore versions. That's going to be part of this process. And then, of course, your developers are going to document the steps and any problems that they encountered. Once in the developer workstation or that sandbox environment, once you've reached the target version, that's where the code changes can really start to happen. So at that point, you have a database that matches your Sitecore target version, and your developers can kind of get to work as far as any code changes that are necessary. Next, there's going to be kind of what I call an upgrade environment, but it's really the production upgrade. And it's going to be a separate environment that you set up, usually on a server, where the upgrade steps will already be present and will be easily able to be replicated. In other words, you're probably going to go through this upgrade multiple times. Your developers just did one. You're probably going to do another for UAT, and perhaps another then for production. And there may be another run or two in there as well. Practice makes perfect. You're going to want to practice this upgrade. You're going to also, the last point, you're going to want to have your content management and your content delivery side ready for the new target version of Sitecore. So really, when the final upgrade happens, once that final upgrade happens, the code is already ready. In other words, it's just changing connection strings, and it's done. Some recommendations. I already said this. Upgrade the databases using, running the Sitecore upgrade packages. Use out-of-the-box Sitecore instances. The Sitecore files and configuration should come from the Sitecore installer. If you're doing custom things, configuration should be patched in. If you have, custom code or custom pages that you've added to your content management environment, that should be part of your build and deploy process for both content management and content delivery. Remember to remove any Sitecore support files that you might have. So if you've gotten a hotfix or patch from Sitecore support, you'll want to remove those because they're not going to be necessary as you upgrade, because likely those hotfixes that you got from support are already going to be included in the new version of Sitecore. You're going to test both content management and content delivery. And don't forget to review your log files, both during the upgrade and after. It's important to make note of any errors that are occurring, or kind of reviewing what's going on during the upgrade process, just to make sure that everything went as expected. Another option as far as upgrade approach is we here at eDynamic have a tool that we call the automatic version upgrader. And really what this tool does is it automates a lot of this process from a database upgrade perspective. So rather than figuring out what jumps you need to make in the upgrade process, this tool does it for you. Also has Selenium built in, so the testing is all automated. And you can have confidence that the upgrade has done its job. Do the pages load correctly? Is the HTML the same as the previous version? I'll show you a quick screenshot of this tool. Essentially, it's just a wizard that you launch from the desktop view in Sitecore. Your current version is going to be pre-selected, and then you select your target version. Simply hit upgrade and watch as it goes. It doesn't make the process any faster. So if you've got a lot of content in your tree, the upgrade process is still going to take a significant amount of time. And then once that version has been upgraded, that's where execute test case comes in. And you see that last screen to the lower right. Selenium will load those pages and make sure that they're loading correctly. A small case study as far as using our upgrade tool. We just did an upgrade at Georgia Pacific. They had 13 sites, and they went from Sitecore 6.6 to 8.1. And we were able to do the upgrade basically start to finish in about a week and a half. That's using our auto upgrade tool, and admittedly this was a best case scenario. So there weren't a ton of code changes that were necessary. They weren't using modules and things like that. So when we did that planning step that I talked about previously, really it was about as clean cut, as clear as could possibly be. Another option is the Sitecore Express migration tool. So this is a tool directly from Sitecore that you can download from dev.sitecore.net. It is a migration, not an upgrade. So you're going to tell the tool, basically in your current instance, let's assume 7.2, tell the tool from your current instance what you want to migrate to the new 8.2 instance. So it's going to migrate content items, media, all of the security stuff, users, roles, permissions, and it's going to assist with the configuration migrations. One of the limitations of the tool today, though, is that you can only migrate from version 7.2, and you can only go to 8.2. Also, you'll see here that Sitecore modules aren't supported, and also the DMS to XDB migration isn't done for you. That would have to be done separately. But for a kind of a simple Sitecore installation where you don't have a ton of modules, maybe you're not currently using analytics, this might be a good tool to at least look into. And this is what it looks like. And just some check boxes. You tell the tool what you want to migrate. So lastly, before we get to some Q&A, just some tips from me. So upgrade your Sitecore regularly. I recommend at least once every 12 to 18 months. Don't upgrade just to upgrade, but you want to avoid being in a situation where you're 4 years behind, for example. So I mean, right now, if you're running 6.6 or 7.0, that's roughly where you're at. Is you're somewhere in the 3.5 to 4.5 year old range. nobody really wants to run old software, and you're missing all the new features of Sitecore. Also, the longer that you wait, the more painful the upgrade process potentially is going to be. You know, the more leaps you'd have to take, the more APIs that might change. I said this earlier, but planning is a key for success. So don't neglect your planning. Do a good inventory of your Sitecore environment, your customizations, your configuration, any modules that you're using, things like that, and really dive into kind of each of those areas and just make sure that you have a good plan for success going to your new target version. There might be some partners on the phone today, but if you're just running Sitecore, you're an organization that's running Sitecore today and you don't have a partner, find one. Find one to help you with this upgrade process. I would love for it to be e-dynamic, but you know, all partners, we do upgrades all the time. So if you're an organization that's maybe intimidated by this, you're running 6.6 or 7.0, you want to get to the latest version of Sitecore, engage with a partner. You're going to have a lot of success getting help. You know, practice helps. You know, often based on the content freeze, the time it takes to upgrade, you may need to do the process several times. So make sure that your developers or whoever's performing the upgrade, that they practice and they don't neglect documenting the steps, because you know, from the time that initially a developer might do an upgrade locally to the time that the target version goes live in production, that could be it could be as little as a couple weeks, right? But it could be 2 or more months, depending how your organization handles the releases and what other changes might be in flight. Engage Sitecore support for issues you can't Google. So if you run into some errors and things like that, don't be afraid to reach out and engage Sitecore support. That's what they're there for. But please note that only Sitecore certified developers can actually engage with support. So if you're an organization that's looking to upgrade their Sitecore, if you don't have a certified developer, you're not going to be able to kind of put a ticket in Sitecore. This isn't a joke. The second to last one, don't use Internet Explorer and run the upgrade. It sounds like a joke, but really Internet Explorer has some deficiencies, I'll call them, as far as long-running processes. So these upgrades can take a really long time. Internet Explorer oftentimes out. If you do a quick Google search for this, you know, Sitecore IE upgrade or Sitecore upgrade IE timeout, you'll find some people that have had exactly that experience. And finally, modify the web config or Sitecore config to increase timeouts. And I actually have a screenshot of some of those. So this is all documented pretty well out on the web as well. But these are the things that you'll want to do to ensure that for a long-running upgrade process, which, you know, the bigger your content tree is, the longer the upgrade is going to take. You want to increase these values to make sure that, you know, a timeout doesn't happen 3/4 of the way through the process or what have you. So that's all I have from a slide perspective. My contact information is up on this slide. I also wanted to point out these last 2 links. So recently, for you, this is specifically for the developers that might be on this webinar, but recently there's a Sitecore Stack Exchange that was launched. You see the URL there. I recently just read today a great question that somebody asked about a Sitecore upgrade, and got 5 or 6 really good answers within a couple days. So it's a great resource for Sitecore developers. I also have a GitHub repository called Awesome Sitecore that lists out a bunch of modules and tools and just other Sitecore stuff that I think is pretty cool. So, you know, feel free to check that out if you're a developer. Feel free to, you know, do a pull request and add your favorite tool. So with that, what questions do we have?
Well, thank you, Scott, for the insights on the Sitecore upgrade process. We have a few questions from the audience. So the first question that we have is that what are the common pitfalls that we see when upgrading to Sitecore 8.1?
Yeah, you know, the most common pitfalls as far as a Sitecore upgrade, kind of any version, I would say, is kind of a lack of planning, and just not understanding, what the upgrade takes as far as code, as far as configuration, Sitecore modules, things like that. So basically everything I kind of went over in that planning section of my deck. Where I see organizations fail with an upgrade or have some trouble is kind of that lack of planning. So nothing really specifically comes to mind version 8.1 of Sitecore, but just in general, a lack of planning tends to be where I see some pitfalls.
Sure, Scott. Another question that we have from the audience is that how is the performance of an on-premise web server with Azure SQL?
Yeah, so what's the performance of using Azure SQL? My experience has been very good. You may have to geo-replicate it, and there's actually a knowledge base article out on Sitecore, on the Sitecore knowledge base that kind of describes that. So if you do a Google search for the Sitecore compatibility page, there'll be a footnote kind of describing the Azure SQL, and then from there you can find what Sitecore recommends from a geo-redundancy perspective. But generally speaking, if you set it up right, performance will be very good. And once again, kind of reiterating, that's kind of software as a service. You don't have to actually worry about your database server.
Thanks, Scott. We have one more question, that can we upgrade to a version of Sitecore 8 without XDB or Mongo?
You can. So there are two modes in Sitecore 8, starting in version 8.1. So I will caution that you don't want to upgrade to 8.0 because this mode doesn't exist. But starting in 8.1, there's a mode called X Management mode that it basically disables all the XDB features. So you can still do things like personalization, but it's all session-based. And there are some other limitations as far as EXM and some of the other Sitecore functionality. All of that's documented, so just kind of Google Sitecore 8.1 X Management mode, and you should find some resources there that kind of just describe what you're losing going to that mode. But I will say, look carefully at XDB. I mean, it's a really powerful tool. Even if you already have an analytics platform today, using XDB to store your contacts and do personalization based on prior sessions is really powerful. But certainly during the upgrade, if you want to phase that approach, I've had a number of clients who have done that. Upgrading to Sitecore 8.x, and then later phase adding the XDB component.
Sure, Scott. We have one more question, that if your website is older, what's the advantage of doing a redesign of the site before an upgrade versus doing the upgrade, then redesigning the site?
That's a good question, and I can't answer that specifically because it's going to be dependent on your current site. I'm actually working with a client right now, and they're on version 6.2 of Sitecore, so super old. And they decided to rather than do an upgrade with their current content, that during this redesign process they're going through, their content is going to change so significantly anyways, that they decided that it would just be better to start brand new. Start brand new, Sitecore 8.2, just build from scratch. So that's certainly an option. Can you upgrade from a really old version and then do a redesign? Certainly. And that might make sense if you're going to reuse a lot of the content. So, a lot of that is a kind of a cost-benefit analysis of, keep the content via the upgrade versus maybe re-entering that content, whether that's a manual process or you develop some code that might do that. I don't know. I guess my answer is it depends, and I've seen a lot of different approaches there. But you got to ask yourself, what does the upgrade give you? You know, what does the upgrade give you versus starting new? You know, starting from scratch.
Sure. Scott, so I guess like we'll ask one more final question, that Mongo just released 3.4 version. Does Sitecore support it?
Not officially. Sitecore might support it when 8.2 update 1 comes out, which is that's supposed to be out really any time now. So I wouldn't be surprised if you know, 8.2 update 1 does support that, but it's not official. So there's a lot of murkiness there. Would it work connecting them on? You know, would 8.2 work connecting to like a 3.4 Mongo? Probably. But it's not officially supported by Sitecore. So that's always what I end up doing, is looking at Sitecore's compatibility charts and really just kind of following the advice that Sitecore gives you. It's going to help you if you need support. It's going to help you if you run into, you know, unexpected behavior or errors in your Sitecore instance. You know, you don't want to be in a situation where something unexpected happens with XDB, and it might be because you're using, you know, an unsupported version of Mongo. So I always tend to err towards what Sitecore officially kind of supports. But like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if you know, that latest version of Mongo is supported with update 1 of Sitecore 8.2, which I'm expecting to be out sometime this month.
Thank you, Scott. Actually, we have one more question from Kalim regarding this. That would you recommend an upgrade to 8.1 using a clean install migration content via packages?
You know, I can't recommend that. It depends on where you're coming from, like what version you're coming from. There are a lot of changes between, for example, 6.6 and 8.1. So I mean, I've seen that approach being taken before, and in theory it works because Sitecore packages, I mean, it just contains the serialized items, similar to how, you know, a TDS or Unicorn work, right? So I mentioned that earlier in my presentation. I mean, really serialized items, migrating content that way in theory works, but especially around personalization rules and things like that, the upgrade is still the recommended approach. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I would caution you against taking that approach. Like I said, I've seen it. Upgrades certainly seem harder than, you know, just using packages or something like that, but there is a reason that Sitecore recommends going the upgrade route or using their migration tool rather than just doing Sitecore packages on a fresh install.
Sure. Thank you for answering the question, Scott. Well, it looks like that we have a few more questions, but we will be getting back on them after the webinar. So thank you once again, Scott, for your time for the webinar. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to connecting with you again. The recording for today's webinar will be available on our website within the next 3 business days. We will also be sharing the webcast URL with all the attendees via email. Please feel free to reach us at contact@edynamic.net with any more questions that you may have regarding the Sitecore upgrade process and the webinar. So thank you once again, Scott, and thank you everyone for your time for attending this webinar.